Good evening and welcome to Kolkata Center for Creativity. I think it's a wonderful day to meet together with this webinar. And today is, I think by now, through social media, and anyway, all of you know today is World Mental Health Day. And so I will be starting with introduction of Kolkata Center for Creativity. It's a multidisciplinary interactive art center of Kolkata, has been working in the areas of research, development through practice, interaction, well-being, and capacity building. So this healing through creative expressions that we have started during pandemic time is one of the initiatives that we have taken in our well-being umbrella. And you can see Tripura Kashyap here, you can see Shuktara Lal here, who are the part of this healing through creative expression. When we have started, they have taken sessions with us, and today we are going to talk about what is creative art therapy and what is it actually, because we generally do not talk about it. And I'm very happy to introduce today's panel. We're having Ms. Tripura Kashyap, Ms. Ratnaburi Rai, and Shuktara Lal with us. Though none of them need any introduction, but it's my duty to introduce them. Tripura Kashyap, she pioneered creative movement therapy in India in 1990. She studied dance movement therapy at Hancock Center, USA, and subsequently obtained her master's in psychology. Tripura received fellowship from Ashoka International Foundation and Indian Ministry of Culture for her innovative work in dance therapy and contemporary dance. She authored My Body, My Wisdom, a handbook on creative dance therapy. She conceived India's first movement therapy course in Delhi, and she is the co-founder of Creative Movement Therapy Association of India. Then we have Ratnabuli Roy. Ratnabuli Roy is an Ashoka Fellow, trained clinical psychologist and mental health activist who is the founder of Anjali, a rights-based organization based in Kolkata which works for persons with mental health condition and or psychosocial disability. She was awarded the Human Rights Watch's Ellison Desforges Award for extraordinary activism. She has been recognized as powerful impact woman by Business Today. She was awarded Times Woman Hero by Times of India. And we are moving to our another panelist, Shuktara Lal. Shuktara Lal is a drama therapist and counselor, teacher, and theatre director based in Kolkata. She is attached to city-based schools and NGOs such as Garden High International, Shri Shri Academy, the Calcutta School of Music. She also counsels clients. Her clients are mostly individuals, couples, and groups. Shuktara also writes and works with an independent publishing house, Writers Workshop. And we are having Ms. Rina Dewan, our director, as our moderator for today's evening. I want to introduce her as well. Apart from being the director of Kolkata Center for Creativity, she is also serving the responsibility as the president of ICOM India and a board member of ICOM Intercom. She is also a state member of Wiki. She has been spearheading many projects in KCC to promote research and development of different disciplines of art that leads to a volumetric and qualitative impact, not only in the art field, but to the society and young artists and performers. She champions and facilitates inclusion, diversity, and gender equality in museum and art spaces. She is pioneering social changes, creating an inclusive culture in Kolkata Center for Creativity that addresses different abilities and choices, gender and sexual diversity, and marginalization of communities through appreciation and application of art. I would request you to write your questions in our question answer box. You can see it here, and if you have comments, you can write in the chat box. Whoever is watching us on Facebook, please write your question there. We'll be addressing it. Welcome you all, and I'm handing over to Rina ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Saraswati, and a very warm welcome to all of you. We'll start with a very basic question. Ratnabali Di, I'll start with you. The most common question we come across from the time we at KCC have started talking about creative therapy. What is creative therapy and how different it is from psychotherapy?
Thank you, Reena. I'm really grateful to Kolkata Center for Creativity for having me here today, this evening, and I'm really privileged to be along with people like Tripura Kashyap and Shuktara. It's a huge honor. But do you think you should be asking me this question, or should it go to Tripura and Shuktara, because they are the pioneers in creative therapy? Should the question go to them, or the question is for me?
You're the psychotherapist.
Yes.
Well, I'm not. Shuktara is, look at Shuktara's smile. That is evident. Okay.
No, the smile is probably a lag. I think you are a psychotherapist.
No. I have a training in psychology, but that doesn't make me a psychotherapist, Reena. And those who are practicing psychotherapists here in Calcutta and those who are watching us from out of Calcutta are going to kill me if I claim now myself as a psychotherapist. Having said that, I think, when we talk about creative art therapy and psychotherapy, I think the difference is perhaps in the premise, and the difference is perhaps in the goals that we want to achieve. And when we say different, it does not mean that they are antagonistic to each other. So in creative arts therapy, there is a specialist person, a specialist facilitator, like say Shuktara, like say Tripura, who would transact with people who are marginalized in some way or the other, or those who are vulnerable, transact with them, guide them, using creative art form as a vehicle, as a tool. Whereas in psychotherapy or in counseling, the major tool is talking, listening, talking. And of course, that is also transactional, because you have to transact between the facilitator and the person. And the beauty of creative therapy also is that it can be conducted in group, and beauty of psychotherapy is that it can also be conducted in groups. So the objectives are different, the goals are different, but as I said, they are not antagonistic. And we look at different art forms like visual painting, like dance, like music, poetry, as brilliant art forms which can help you to deal with your inner conflict, trauma, whereas psychotherapy helps you to dig into your unconscious, excavate your unconscious, and bring a kind of synchronicity between what your id is saying, what your overactive superego is saying, and what the reality is. The primary principle of psychotherapy is perhaps to make the superego benign and make it dance with reality and with your id, which is an impulse that sits with us. I will stop here, and I think I will want Tripura and Shuktara to speak on this, because they are more equipped, I think.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for your answer, and also for acknowledging that, because we do see sometimes that at times that the word psychotherapy is used quite loosely, and in a way lose its value, and also the kind of training that goes behind it. So thank you for acknowledging, first of all, that that you're not a trained one, but of course we do understand that from where you come and kind of experience you have. So very rightly, as you said, I'll move on to the very next question which comes out from this is to Tripura, that Tripura, what is dance movement therapy? Because uh, the word dance itself and then therapy, they're very conflicting, because dance, we as common people, we assume that's something for pleasure, and therapy is something that it comes with a purpose. And how these two, dance movement therapy, what is that and how different it is from dance?
Right. So, yeah, I just want to, first of all, thank you for inviting me. And I'm so thrilled to be with Ratnaboli, Shuktara, Reena, and of course, Shrabashti. Thank you very much. I just want to say that dance movement therapy is a way in which we get people to express their thoughts and feelings through their body language in very simple terms. Yeah, that's what it is. And of course, the therapist is very different from a teacher, right? The teacher teaches dance. They're very precise with the movement. You need to know, it's like the body fits into a prefabricated form or a style. Whereas in dance therapy, the dance can be adapted to different body types, different age groups, different diagnostic categories. And the whole idea is, how can you get people to express their suppression, their repressed thoughts and feelings, their traumas, their memories, their fantasies? How can you get them to express all this through their body language? And remember that 75% of our communication with the world is through our body language. And this is what we tease out. We tease out movement material from people's body language, which we call a personal movement language. So as this personal movement language builds up, we get people to access their deeper thoughts, things that they've not been able to express through words. So that whole thing of when words are not enough, that's where I think the creative arts therapy step in for people who cannot express their anger or aggression through words. But if you give them a cushion and you say, express your anger through this cushion, they're able to do it. Or if you say, draw your anger on this paper, they take a crayon and they scratch it across the paper. So I think in a way, dance therapy is about that. It's kind of teasing movement out of people's bodies and helping them to become comfortable in this body that we live, because the body is the site for all our traumas, for all our histories. And in a way, I think it's also to replace this negative traumatic experiences with more positive movement experiences. Yeah. And it's not that easy. It's not like, on the first day people come in and you say that, okay, I'm going to switch on the music, please express your trauma. It doesn't work that way. It takes a long time, I think, for movement building and development to happen. And it also takes time for people to experience the pleasure of movement, to explore movement, to have fun with it. And once they're comfortable in their bodies, then you can take them to that emotional space, that safe space where they can express their thoughts, their feelings, and perhaps also begin to figure out what is their future going to look like. Yeah, it's not just staying in the past, but bringing them to the present and kind of showing them that there's a light at the end of the tunnel which they need to access. And it's not about giving them advice, but helping them find their own solutions to the problems that they've arrived with. So I usually most of these movement activities are from a movement activity basket, and I call them movement capsules, because for every little problem there's a movement capsule that you can administer in a way. It's just a colloquial way of putting it out there, but that's what maybe in a nutshell movement therapy is. I think I've taken longer to make it a nutshell.
But you really put it in a very lovely way. I'll just add a bit of question for the people who really absolutely have no idea about it. So is it essential to know, have knowledge of dance to be able to get into a dance movement therapy?
Not at all. The clients who come to me are not dancers, right? I mean, they're all non-dancers. So in fact, the dance therapist needs to put themselves in the client's shoes and see how it feels, not being a dancer. But I think it's very important for the dance therapist to know how to dance. Yeah, that I feel is very important. Even if you're coming from the psychology field or social work field, I think it's very important to have a body discipline, to go to a class, to learn. Even if you don't learn a form or a style, that doesn't matter, but at least to learn creative movement, yeah, in which you learn to kind of access your own personal movement vocabulary so that you feel comfortable in your own body before you can work with a client. Yeah.
Lovely.
So I don't think it's important for clients to be dancers, but for the dance therapist herself.
I mean,
Yes.
while Tripura was talking about creative therapy and how it resides in your body and how it helps resolve the trauma and memory, I also want to add that we work in a context which Shuktara is familiar because Shuktara was part of a small project. People with severe mental health conditions often have articulation problem and language problem. And it's actually because of the condition. So therefore, creative therapy, because it is non-threatening and because it doesn't compel you to reflect and analyze, people find it comfortable. People find it pleasurable, because while we try and build capacities of the people who are languishing in mental hospitals, we have seen that some people get very, very uncomfortable with the theory, with the compulsion of having to reflect. While being in dance movement or in theater or in music or in visual painting, it's very non-threatening and they find a deep pleasure and connection.
Right.
So this is what I wanted to say.
And I'm sure it would help in opening up in a way, because if you straight away ask somebody to start talking about the trauma they have gone through, it's really not possible. It rather people close down sometimes. So that way, I think it opens you up, because you are just doing through the movements and through different activities something that you are not really straight away answering to what you went through or what your state of mind right now is. Thank you so much for that, Tripura and Ratnabali Di. I'll move on to Shuktara. Shuktara, your question is, of course, the extension of the previous question. We have got to know a bit about what is DMT, dance movement therapy, and what about the drama therapy and how different it is from the theater training class.
Firstly, just continuing what you had said, Reena, Srabusti is very aware of this, how much I love doing things for Kolkata Center for Creativity, and how much I appreciate the space you are offering in this time for everybody, making it a very inclusive space. I really appreciate that. Moving to drama therapy, I think one core component of drama therapy that cuts across internationally is the concept of role. The fact that every single one of us as people, we constantly move from one role to another at every point. Like in a day, we are often, without even thinking about it, inhabiting multiple roles, or we might be moving from one role to another role very quickly, very effortlessly. Right now, for example, all of us, we're to some extent in a formal space, so we are inhabiting body language and expressions and manner of speaking that is in keeping with how we see these roles. But after this webinar, I might just lie down or I might be playing with my cats. It's a different role that I am taking on. So at one aspect of drama therapy is management of roles. Because what happens if, say, a role that you are taking on is creating challenges. For example, for some of my female clients who come to me, they might be having difficulty being a partner to their partners or the challenges in that space. And therefore, work that I will do with them is often based on that, on the desire to enhance the intrapersonal role of being an ally to yourself, being your own partner, figuring out how you can be your own friend, be your own partner, be your own ally, and then using that to create a more healthy role with, say, the external partner that you are thinking of. But that's looking at roles and essentially managing and negotiating the challenges that come with playing different roles in your life. Apart from that, of course, it draws on various theater techniques. For example, simple things like improvisation. If you feel, say, inhibited or unsure, theater is a fantastic place to find yourself, to I think appreciate who you are, to really appreciate every single thing that you bring to the table. And improvisation, because it is so free flowing and so non-judgmental, it allows you that space to just be, and to just be who you are in that moment without having to be answerable to anybody. Also, theater games. Now, the thing about theater games in a theater class is the objectives over there will be slightly different from, say, if a client is coming to you or if you are going to a group where you are thinking of theater games that will help with the situation. So if, say, there is a client who is having issues with anger, thinking of theater games that might help just help sort of create a kind of a balance, a sort of equilibrium that will grow skills like patience, concentration, and through that help reduce the anger. So I, at least, and I think I speak for all drama therapists when I say this, it's never about really thinking of a game that is directly connected with what issue you are working with or what concern you are working with. It's more about, okay, so this game will be doing this, and this might help address this concern that the client is coming with in an indirect kind of way. And I think that's one of the nice things about drama therapy is it is not prescriptive. It's a very sort of exploratory space, which is offering various kinds of tools to sort of help the client choose which tool is going to work for the client. Another thing that I find very effective is re-scripting, writing monologues, creating dialogues, rehearsing what you want to say. I think sometimes clients come to me at least with difficulties about articulating themselves or having, say, a difficulty in a relationship. And this can be a family relationship, it can be at work. So scripting dialogues, actually rehearsing these conversations. And therefore, instead of, say, rehearsing for a play, you're rehearsing for a real life desire that I want to be able to communicate this to this person. So helping with that. But outside of this, drama therapy can also be very process oriented, where you are working to put up a play with the intention that that play itself is going to be therapeutic. That in the process of creating a performance, you are receiving things, or you're receiving an experience that is therapeutic for you. And in my work with NGOs, that's been primarily the way in which we have worked, that you're sort of devising things together. The group is going to be creating something, allowing them to recognize their own agency in creation, and how agency can help in, again, that sort of indirect intention of confidence building, self-articulation, and therapy. But to some extent, what I am talking about over here is also drawing on very American, the American history of drama therapy. I think in my work, increasingly, I'm finding it, I have really been trying to look at how drama therapy can emerge from the context that we live in, as in Indian theater forms. So often I find myself using quite a bit of rasa work from the Natya Shastra, looking at the rasas that we inhabit. Like if we have to sort of look at, say, the rasas that tend to sort of, that we give primacy to, what would those rasas be? And which rasa do we feel we want, say, a little less of? How can we create a space of shanti in us, particularly in a time like this? And So that would be one thing. The second thing is drawing on Indian mythology, looking at how we can question myths, because obviously, like in any country, Indian myths are also can be quite complicated and difficult to um, difficult to come on board with. So if, say, you're using a myth as a sort of as a metaphor to go into things that you are experiencing in your own life. And finally, another thing that I think is very unique to India and working in the creative art therapy space in India is the messiness. We are a very messy country. There isn't a concept of boundaries. Everybody is on top of everybody. And therefore, I think one of the things that a lot of my field work happened through my work in Kolkata Shongbid. So a lot of my sort of practical on the field work experience was when I was working with Kolkata Shongbid. And while I was with Kolkata Shongbid had still, I think, partners with Anjali, and we used to go to Lumbini Park and Pavlov, which are government hospitals for people with mental health illnesses. And over there, you can't use the theory that you are coming with. If, say, you have studied abroad, it's very difficult to put that into practice in a space like a government hospital that we were going to. So I remember my colleagues in Kolkata Shongbid, we would be talking to Shukladi, who used to be the program coordinator over there, and just understanding what the concerns were, what were their medical challenges. And then based on that, we would be creating activities. So I remember a lot of my drama therapy work with them was just simple things like recognizing emotion and facial expression, body language, eye contact, body-mind coordination, and then just giving them a space of release, a space for a very brief while, having that opportunity to lead a different kind of life. So I know I've taken up a very sort of a long time to say this, but I think my intention is also to sort of underline the need to know that it's different. Working in India is in itself, it's a different form of engagement as a creative art therapist than if you are working abroad.
No, thank you so much. That kind of elaboration was needed. And since you have already touched it, so I'll now move to the next question, which is to Ratnabali Di. I was planning to ask it later, but now the platform for that is built. Ratnabali Di, for Anjali, you chose the creative art therapy for the therapeutic process. Could you please elaborate a bit more? You did mention a few things, but could you please elaborate a bit more on the reason that why you chose creative art therapy for Anjali?
To begin with, I don't know how to put it. I do not want to offend anyone here who's sitting on the panel, around the table, and also those of you who are watching us. While we started with the idea of using creative art as a therapeutic process, but as we moved along the journey, and as we heard the narratives of the people, at this point we are very, very hesitant about calling it a therapy. And this came as a huge, insightful revelation to us when one of the participants of the Anjali program, this is how our brochure looks like, and this is the organization, of course, I belong to. So one of them said that when you dance, when you paint, it is a simple dancing and a simple painting. For us, it is a class, it is a session, and it is therapy. Why is it so? While the body of evidence is growing in creative arts therapy, we are people like Kolkata Shangbed, Shuktara, Tripura, they have worked relentlessly to create indicators, to measure impact. But we at this point, we are uncomfortable in using the word therapy. So what we do is we use various creative forms to build, to enhance their capacity and capability, because our framework is that we believe in the infinite possibilities of people who are suffering from mental health condition, severe mental illness, languishing in mental hospital, living outside, within the community, in family spaces, in community. So for us, as Uttara was mentioning, for us, two keywords now is agency building and empowerment. So whatever creative form can help build agency, can help in their quote unquote empowerment, can determine their self-determination, we are good with it. Because we have realized that even with the training of psychology, you are not in a position to really understand what is therapeutic for them and what is not therapeutic for them, because we are also talking about neutralizing the power equation. And if you're talking about neutralizing the power equation, then we have to question the therapist-therapy relationship, which is also based on power. Because Shuktara will know the context, and I'm sure Tripura will also know, in mental hospital, there are so many oppressive powers in play that as Anjali, as a civil society organization going inside the hospital, we have to be very, very conscious about not using power as another oppressive tool in the name of therapy. But do they not paint? Of course they paint. Do they not dance? They dance. And you know, one of the projects that we did was with everyday gesture. And you know, Shohini of Kolkata Shangbed told me, I just cannot dance. I just cannot. So she told me, Ratnadi, it's untrue, because the way you move your hands is part of dancing. Probably our assumption of dancing is the traditional dance form, which we think we cannot dance, but as long as we move our body and there is fluidity, there is dynamicity, it is about movement. So let's concentrate on that. So coming back to what I was saying, that yes, they do a lot of visual painting. They do a lot of installation. We are very big into installation. We encourage people to take part in drama. I will just add with Shuktara that in drama, we are also looking for social role valorization. Because with mental health condition, what happens is your role as a human being, your role as who you are gets completely eroded. And you then are reduced to a patient. You then are reduced to a number. You then are reduced to a label of whether you are a schizophrenic or a bipolar or a depressive. And we break away from that by using the creative art forms to delve deep into their personhood, into their individualism, and let them do whatever they want to. And along with this, I also want to mention that while we are uncomfortable with the use of word therapy, we are also very, very mindful that there is no aesthetic policing when we do these things, because aesthetic policing comes in very strongly, because then the facilitators think that, okay, this is not the way to do it. This is how it should look aesthetically. So then it becomes a politics of aesthetics. And we really have to be mindful and cautious about that. Just to quickly end with one point, that just last year we did an installation project called Across the Line. So Across the Lines combined drama combined installation, combined sculpturing, combined a lot of dance forms to create what their life is in the institution. And when we say across the line, we mean people from that side of the line coming into this side of the line and blurring the different labels and different lines that exist in our mind and in the society and in the community. This is their conceptualization of a home. And and the beds, because bed is their home, because that's the only thing that they have. And the beds, and because they languish there for so long, because we are not accommodative, that the beds have grown roots. And they had this beautiful expression as to why a home is perched up on top of the tree, because I want to be safe. So that's their expression of safety. How poignant this is. This is another installation that was done, because in hospital, if you go to any hospital, it is so biomedical, it is so prescriptive, it is so reliant on your prognosis, diagnosis. There is no opportunity, no window to creativity. And this is, I mean, there cannot be any powerful narrative other than this, where there is a bed and there are bed bugs stuck on the tree, just to express what their life is in the hospital. But while these images are maybe uncomfortable and to an extent morbid, but they also imagined their future. And that imagination of future was something which is beautiful, with wings. And they even conceptualized a home with 2 cats underneath the bed. I think creative therapy is valuable, goes beyond the prescriptive biomedical model, and that's where it adds value. This is the conceptualization of Ma Durga, and you know, we are soon going to welcome Ma Durga, because the festivities start on the 22nd. So this is their conceptualization. Ma Durga lands on the hospital bed, because they don't have any window to go out and watch Durga Pratima, and the cats are underneath the bed, the consorts are underneath the bed. That's very interesting. They are not up there on the bed. So this is how we use creative therapy in our work, and it has enriched us as NGO workers, and it is also a participatory process where it enriches the facilitators. So it's a mutual transaction.
Lovely. And the artwork, being an artist and coming from a creative center, you did say that there is no, you try not to have any aesthetic policing, but the artworks are aesthetically so pleasing that as an art itself, they are very nice in the sense of that not they're expressive of what the artist or the people behind it are trying to say, but also it's pleasing to the eye, the way everything has been handled, the color balance, the structures, the whole space, the way it has been dealt with.
No,
It's
that
really
was because it was facilitated by a visual artist, Srikanto Paul, and his team. But the content, the most important thing, the content came from them, because we did several workshops over a span of 3 months. And Reena, thank you so very much for your appreciation.
Thank you. I'll now move to the next question that, of course, we have talked about the creative therapy for a certain purpose, but is it possible, Tripura, that one can just do the dance or drama therapy for general well-being? Is it possible?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I worked a lot with clients and, mentally ill adults, as well as hearing impaired children, visually impaired adults. And at one point, I did think that therapy was only for people with special needs or disabilities, because that's where my training was. It was in those areas, or even working, for example, with people in a de-addiction centers, and so that was really interesting. I mean, I learned a lot, because after training at Hancock and coming back to India, I began to work with different populations to understand how can I facilitate differently for different groups. Yeah. And so, yes, I learned a lot, and that's how I built up my movement therapy career, in collaboration with everyone that I worked with. And facilitating movement therapy for a group who's visually impaired is a very different experience than when you do it with children with mental challenges. Yeah. So the facilitation is different, the things you say is different, the movement activities you use is different, the responses that you get is different. So this is the way in which a therapist's own movement repertoire expands by working with more and more different kinds of groups. And later, as I began working with special educators, teachers who wanted to be trained in this kind of therapy, and these were all normal neurotic adults, right? So they wanted to be trained because they wanted to use dance therapy with their own children or people that they worked with. And that's how I got the Ashoka Fellowship, to be able to travel around the country and to train people. And the second reason I also got it was to also explore the therapeutic potential in Indian dance forms. Yeah. Like, what are the gestures that we can use from classical dance, or what are navarasas, like Shuktara mentioned, or what are the different body positions, etc. So these were the two reasons I got it for. But one thing I want to say is that as I began working with special educators and teachers, many of them would walk into the workshop and say, look, we are normal, nothing is wrong with us, but we have two left feet. So what we would like to do is observe what you're doing, and we can take that back to our children. They themselves never wanted to dance. And this always has surprised me, because in a country where there are thousands and thousands of dance forms and physical traditions, so rich, and yet when people walk into the workshop, they're so ashamed of their bodies. They don't want to move their bodies because it reveals them. It appears that they're naked or something. But at the end of maybe 1 or 2 days, I mean, it used to be amazing that they wouldn't stop dancing. There was so much of movement language trapped in their bodies that they wouldn't stop dancing. And so I began to find that even normal functioning, normal neurotic population, as I like to call them, they were really like, they themselves had so many problems in their bodies: lack of body coordination, lack of eye contact, lack of group coordination, also the thing with body awareness, no self-awareness. So these were really interesting for me, because it was like, wow, even normal people have so many problems. So that's when my journey with people who said they were normal began. I, in fact, began to work a lot with corporate groups, with teachers, with special educators, with, social workers, therapists. And I feel, yes, dance movement therapy can be used almost with any group, even if you do not have a problem. For example, a woman who works in a corporate office came to me and said, look, I want to do a freelance job. And at the same time, I also want to do this 9 to 5 job, because I'm really confused. Do I want to be a freelancer, or do I want to do a 9 to 5 job? So we began with a warm up, and I divided the space into 2 zones. One zone was the freelancing zone, the free space where she could do whatever she wanted. Yeah. She could get up at whatever time, sleep at whatever time, do any kind of movement. And the second zone in that space was the 9 to 5 job, where time was very structured. And, so it was really interesting that she, for about half an hour, she experimented in both these zones with movement, with music. And at the end of that half an hour, she herself came to the realization that she wanted to be in a 9 to 5 job, you know, because she said, look, what am I doing in this freelance job? Because there's too much of time. I don't want to get worried, and more thoughts keep spiraling in my head. I'm going nuts with that time that I have. I prefer the 9 to 5 job because things are more structured and things are much more, people are telling me what to do and I'm happy with that. So it's just interesting that you come out with these kind of creative strategies to work with people. And I've really found this work very interesting. I have a lot of normal functioning clients who come to me, and but with every group, I've realized that you got to take them through 5 stages. Yeah. The first stage is always to do with movement seeding. You're seeding movement into people's bodies, because the assumption, of course, is that they haven't learned, dancing for a very long period in their lives. And the second stage is movement exploration. Like I said, they take a lot of pleasure in it. They do a lot of improvisation. They enjoy the variations that they make with their movement. And the third stage is movement expression. This is where, like I said, the thoughts and feelings come out. And the fourth stage is called resolution. So they've come with a particular problem or a need or an issue, and they've been able to resolve it for themselves, just like this woman did in the movement therapy session. And the last stage is integration. Can you integrate whatever you've learned or whatever you've experienced in this session in your real life? Can you take it back? So if you manage to build your confidence in a session, can you take that confidence back into your real life? Yeah, and express that. So this is the way in which we work, and it's really exciting. And you got to think on your feet. It's on one hand you have the movement activity basket with thousands and thousands of prefabricated activities, but on the other hand you also are with clients, and on the spot you got to figure out what kind of a movement experience you want to offer to them. So it's almost like choreographing a session, though choreography is a word that's used for dance productions. But actually, even in a therapy session, you're subtly choreographing the movement experience for the client. So just so that they can generate movement and express who they are. Yeah.
Lovely. So great to know about the way you explained that, how that person was able to find out that whether she wants to be in a fixed structured role, or she wants to be more free. And for some people that freedom doesn't work. It's better to realize that. So I'll now go to my from this only I'll go to the next question to Shuktara before I move to Ratna De. Shuktara, so like I got personally also got to know a few things from you and Tripura and Ratnadi, that the DMT is not limited to, it can be for people who, so to say, do not have any problem, in a way normal, but okay, I don't really agree that we are normal if we don't have any those issues. But uh, so tell me that what is the understanding, what is the situation of DMT at present in India, like in terms of understanding and acceptability?
I think it's pretty complicated because I think I'll just preface this by saying that a lot of the things that Ratnabuli was speaking about are things that I have been thinking about in terms of, what is the future of how are we envisaging the future of therapy, creative arts therapy, of course, but therapy in general, because I completely agree with the idea, not with the idea, with the fact that it is obviously there. I mean, there is that hierarchy. You can't. It's not something that. It's difficult to not run away from that. So that's anyway. So that was something that I just wanted to say over there, that I completely understand what and agree with what Ratnabuli was saying. As far as India goes, I think we have a long way to go for a lot of reasons. One is it's still, in my opinion, a very privileged space, therapy. there isn't any kind of, there isn't any degree program in creative arts therapy in India. And until you have a university degree program that is open to everybody, and by which I mean, say, a subsidized state university, you can't, it's not possible to expect that everybody will be able to afford to go out of India to study and then come back and work over here. There's something very wrong in that, in my opinion. So till that happens, I think the way in which people train, it's you figure out ways in which you can train. I think, for example, there in India, a simple way of training for people based on the circumstances is you might do an MA in psychology, and you might do you might work with a theater group, or you might do some theater training of your own, because theater programs too, along with dance programs, are limited in India. So you're building dance experience, and you are studying psychology as you're graduating in psychology or doing a postgraduate course in psychology. But that is not the same as obviously studying, say, doing a BA or an MA in drama therapy or creative arts therapy or expressive arts therapy or dance therapy. And then, of course, my next question would be, how are we framing it? Because on what basis are we creating a curriculum? The curriculum has to be very India-centric. India is a massive country with very, very unique traditions in each state. So it will take time. And I don't think there, to develop therapy courses, creative art therapy courses at the university level in India. And I don't mean private universities over here, because those again are very expensive and very privileged. I mean at state level universities. It requires a lot of unthinking, I think. And I don't know how, I don't really know where we are as far as that goes. So there are courses, like for example, Simtai has a course, Kolkata Shongbid has a course, but obviously it's not the same as having that degree program, in my opinion. So I think it's an exciting space. It's an exciting time to be working in these fields in the country, because there's definitely a lot more interest in it. There's a lot more openness and curiosity about creative arts therapy. I think the young, say, people who are now in school, moving to say 24, 25, that age group is far more, I think, open to talking about mental health than, say, people from 30 plus, 30 onwards. So there's quite a shift over there. But I think that's a wonderful shift, because it is very important to talk about mental health, to talk about neurotypical people requiring therapy, neuroatypical people requiring therapy, and accepting the validity of therapy. That it should not be a secret. It should not be something that you don't talk about. It's none of us. All of us need therapy. Very simple sentence, actually. I don't need to really think this through. So yeah, if that answers your question, I think we have a long way to go. I think there is increasing interest, but it's still, in my opinion, there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
I think it's a very interesting question that you have put forward as to what the future looks like. I think the future will be very, very exciting. As Shuktara says, that there is a lot of curiosity. It will be more exciting if we can stop contestation with psychiatry or with any other science. Let us accept the fact that creative arts expression is not a science, and therefore we need not borrow from the medical domain. Yeah, and let us work out our own innovative indicators. Let us not rely on the medical terminology of how the concentration is improving. Whether there is, whether about the hand and motor coordination. These are very prescriptive, neurotypical language. So if we can move away from that, I think it is a huge possibility. And the second thing that I wanted to say that, you know, very few people are there who are like Shuktara and Tripura, not because they are sitting around this table, because it is not with the domain of creative arts expression that there is a problem. There is a huge problem in the facilitation process. Because it's not possible for Tripura or for Shuktara to be present in X number of places. So the training that is happening, there is a problem of facilitation. There comes the aesthetic policing, there comes communication challenges. In fact, not examining your own biases and stances as well. So I personally think that investment, because today is World Mental Health Day, we must ensure that more investment is made in creative arts expression to look at agency, to look at self, to resolve, to be a better, perhaps not a better, maybe another iteration of who I am. Let us not also go into the binary of neurotic, psychotic, normal, abnormal, because this binaryization is also problematic. Let us remain in the messiness, let us remain in the murkiness. My urgent appeal would be that it doesn't matter who you are. At the end of the day, these are just labels. Whether I am neurotic, whether I am psychotic should not matter. What should matter is how I'm negotiating with my own self as to whether I want a freelance job or whether I want a 9-to-5 job, and whether I'm accessing Tripura to help me resolve that crisis within me.
So the mental, there is nothing like that. There is a disorder, because it is like you are negotiating with your daily questions through creative art therapy, and that is why it is not sort of a healing. It could be just answering your queries, your questions, and how to deal with it. So thank you so much, Ratnadi. And I'm just looking at the questions simultaneously coming from the audience. So I think Shuktara has already answered to Surya Deepa Datta, who was asking about how she can learn these therapy. And if by chance you have missed listening to Shuktara, so please you can again look at the Facebook page of Kolkata Center for Creativity, where this session will stay alive and you can revisit it whenever you want. There is another question, I think, Ratnadi, for you. Ma'am, I would like to know how come many creative people develop depression so hard that they stop practicing their skills and even start to dislike everything that they loved to do or were appreciated about? What is the solution for them? This question is from Adrita Nandi.
Thanks, Adrita, for your question, but I don't think that creative people are more afflicted with depressive disorder as opposed to non-creative people. To give you a quick statistics, which I don't like quoting, but I have to, 1 in 4 suffers from some kind of mental health condition or the other. So it is a mythology that we have created that creative people are genius and creative people have mental health condition, drawing upon our own understanding of who Salvador Dali was. And therefore, that mythology keeps perpetuating. Now, if the statistics is such, it is obvious that it's going to afflict many, many of us, whether you are creative or not, whether you are an ordinary person with non-creative propensity. How to come out of it? It depends on the severity of the problem, how you are understanding the issue, And there are many, many ways to come out of it. You've heard Shuktara and Tripura talking about the alternative forms of, for a lack of a better word, alternative forms of treatment that we can access. There is also psychotherapy, there is also counseling, and of course there is also medication, but that will depend on your choice, on your context, your trajectory, and what do you want to make of your life. Because I know many people, those who do not access any kind of treatment and just deal with their depression and think that today is a bad day and tomorrow is not going to be such a bad day. So it all depends. There is no prescriptive answer, yes or no to that. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll continue with my last question for you, Ratnadi, is that you started your journey as a psychologist, as you mentioned, and now you address yourself as mental health activist. Why this transition, and what role you define for mental health activist?
Well, there is no transition really, and I will just quote Shuktara. Many years ago, when Shuktara was a young intern with Kolkata Shangved and she was coming to Pavlov Hospital, she met me one afternoon, sunny afternoon, and she told me that, Ratnadi, I feel for any creative person practicing creative arts, expressive therapy has to be rooted in Psi disciplines, psychology, social work, etc. Do you remember Shuktara in the outside Pavlov? So just to reiterate that as such, there is no transition, and mental health activist is not something I have chosen. It has been given to me because of my 2 decades of work in trying to change the landscape of the country, engaging with the international policymakers and national policymakers, and wanting to make mental health a developmental issue, development agenda. This is not a health issue, a kind of, monolithic stuff which goes beyond, again, the prescription of prognosis, diagnosis. It has to be intersectoral. It has to be looked at through multiple lenses of gender, feminism, sexuality, ability, livelihood, poverty. So therefore, Reena, you also wear so many hats. Does that mean that you have transitioned from one role to the other? And I really don't take all these labels very seriously, because I personally don't believe in labels. So therefore, yes, my training is in psychology. It has helped me to understand how theory can be applied in the field, and how we can make it more expansive beyond what they teach you in classroom. But as such, I don't take any of these labels seriously, honestly.
We will take one question for Tripura from audience. It's anonymous attendee. If we do not include medical background in the process of creative therapy, how to deal with sudden surge of emotions and neurosignals? Shouldn't a therapy be all-inclusive method? It does not mean that I advocate medical terminalization of people's difficulty. Tripura.
Okay, I think that question is more for Ratna, no? Because she was the one who brought this up. But I'm just going to answer this in my own way.
Yeah.
So in dance therapy, we have, movement assessment and evaluation, which we use. These are also coding sheets that are definitely non-medical. It's much more to do with observing movement. I don't even call it movement analysis. It's not even about that, but it's just to observe movement. What are some of the needs and issues that are coming out when a person moves? So when a person moves, I've noticed this, that there are some splits in the body. The right side is not able to coordinate with the left side, or the upper part of the body is not able to coordinate with the lower part. So they're not able to do a particular movement in the way that they want to. So through the movement evaluation and assessment, which runs for about 3 or 4 pages, and I think this assessment is hugely influenced by Laban, by Rudolf Laban, who was a Hungarian pioneer in the field of modern dance. And he came up with a lot of movement language to look at movement. He would just sit in a marketplace and watch people move and try to understand the different nuances of movement. So that's what happens in movement evaluation. And based on that, we create a session plan. We create long-term, short-term goals. And I think it's really helpful because otherwise, you know, you can just walk into a session and you can randomly keep doing movement activities that have nothing to do with the group nor the needs and issues they've come up with. Or even when you're working with an individual, you can just superimpose whatever you know. So in a way, I think what the movement evaluation does, it keeps you on track. Yeah, it measures the progress that you're making. Like for example, on day one, your body coordination might be really poor, but on day 8, the body coordination has really improved, and you're able to like throw a ball, catch a ball. You're able to actually, work with other people in a group. You're able to mirror people. So in that sense, I think I really believe that movement assessment is very important because it helps you to be able to work with people better. Yeah.
You know, it's very interesting that while we are talking about creative expression and creative therapy, that this whole issue of medicalization has come in. My question is, why do we think that surge of emotion is unhelpful for an individual? It's because we have constructed this notion, which is a Western notion, that reason and rationality is to be hierarchized over emotions and over feelings. And we as mental health activists and workers have to really, really now invest in helping people to name their emotion, to name their feelings, because none of us actually come up with the names of feelings and emotions that we are experiencing and have a name for it. So maybe it's time to, examine and interrogate that why emotions are bad, why surge of emotion has to be controlled. And let me tell you that there are no medication available, at least as far as my knowledge goes, which can help you in bottling up the emotion. And is that what we want?
Absolutely. Even in the working space, I see that if somebody is bottling up emotions, their performance starts getting affected because of that. And sometimes it reaches to a level where actually it's very harmful for the entire group itself, because one day it will come out, but it will come out in that high level that it is not nice for anybody. So that way, this bottling up of emotions that we are sort of conditioned, that we have to learn to handle our emotions and we don't have to be expressive about them, is something that has been conditioned into us from the very early childhood in India. And that's something that, I like it when my daughter is able to, at times as a mother, I may feel that, why she's being so expressive, but at the same time, I feel, thank God, she's so expressive that if she's not feeling good about something, she just says it and moves on and, deals with it instead of just bottling it up inside her. And that time I feel that it's my responsibility as a mother that I do not try to tame her by saying, no, learn to handle it because you are supposed to. So that's something that I see even in my workplace as well as home, that this bottling up of emotion is really something which is being taught to us from the early childhood, that we have to learn to do that. We'll just take 2 questions and close the session. One is for Shuktara. Anuradha Gupta is saying that she completely agree with Shuktara. Just the way a session with the masseur relaxes our bodies, and can creative art therapy not be instrumental in relieving mental fatigue and increase mental and emotional well-being?
Yeah, definitely. I think, what Ratnaboli has said and Tripuri was saying is that it's the same, that it should, if anything, be used for wellness. And it does give you that space of being of reclaiming yourself, I think. Reclaiming yourself, well, first, I think, getting to know yourself again. So getting be acquainted with yourself and being reacquainted with yourself in a space that doesn't have the rules of society, so to speak. And through that, you're again accepting yourself, and also from acceptance, appreciating yourself. And that is, so the creative arts gives you that space to just be. And of that, it's, it is working with you, but at the same time, it's also not working with you. It can be something that you're doing that has absolutely nothing to do with anything else in your life. Just by virtue of that, I think it's giving you that sense of well-being. It's enhancing your enhancing your wellness. And I genuinely feel that any of the creative arts, any of the arts, the performing arts, as well as art, does help stress release, as long as it's an equal space, as long as it's an inclusive and respectful space. I say this because, to just sort of take it a little further, if you're looking at, say, theatre groups, for example, and I'll specifically speak about Bangla group theatre, I don't think that space is necessarily a space where you will, which will promote a sense of personal well-being. Artistic, yes, but also perhaps because the hierarchies are very enforced. I think sometimes dance groups can also be like that. So this does require obviously a kind of a space where, which is a very inclusive, respectful space where you don't have somebody who is on top and everybody else is.
Thank you. I don't know who would like to answer this question. Is from Dr. Manisha Das Gupta. Life means movement. Absence of movement is a signature of death. Can stillness of mind be inculcated by creative therapies? Please shed light onto this.
I mean, I'll just say that from my point of view that yes, I think stillness of mind can definitely, it's something that I think all forms of creative arts therapy will be exploring to some extent.
Yeah, I think so, because I've heard a lot of people say, and I've also experienced it myself, that somehow when we move, we are in the moment. We stop thinking, and it really stills the mind. I want to give one example, of Gabriela Roth, who came up with the 5 rhythms, and these 5 rhythms are different energies of life, different states of being. So the first one is flow, then there's staccato, then there's chaos, lyrical, as well as stillness. And it's really interesting that each rhythm is maybe done for about 25 minutes minimum. And when you go through these different rhythms, when you go through the flow, with the body, and when you go through the staccato of the body, when you go through the craziness, the chaos, and as well as the lyrical, the grace, the kind of using movement to reach out. And then you come to a point of stillness where you don't stop the movement, but the movement really becomes slow, and you feel so one, with your own body, and you feel that strengthening of the connections deep within yourself. And I think that for me is really stilling the mind. Yeah, that I think 5 rhythms is a great way of stilling the mind as well as the body, and to come to that space, that that sense of equanimity that Buddha talks about, that you've experienced all these different rhythms, and now finally you're at that space where you can just be yourself. So I think that's how I'd like to answer this question.
When we talk about stillness and movement, we have to be mindful that we are also excluding large number of people from this discourse, because there are people who have spinal cord issues, there are people who are bound on wheelchairs, there are people with multiple disabilities. For them, movement is something that they really aspire. But does that mean that they do not experience centeredness or they do not experience calmness? They do. So I think the stillness of mind also is to do with the philosophical understanding of who you are and where you are existing at that point in your realm of life. So therefore, when we talk about stillness, we also talk about centeredness, and centeredness can come through talking, listening, talking as well. And when we talk about movement, let us also be cautious that we are not talking about movement in terms of moving your limbs, because movement also happens at a psychic level within the interiority of the mind, which we can't see and therefore cannot fathom whether it is moving or not.
True, absolutely. Thank you so much. So let's close this session with a closing statement from all of you. Shuktara.
I'm actually still processing a lot of this myself, being very honest. I'm going to be thinking a lot about the things that have come up. So I mean, for me, it's, I am a panelist, yes, but I have gained immensely, and a lot of questions that have been nascent are sort of, being reignited further. And it's, at an emotional level, I always love being on a panel with Ratnabuli. She's a person who I have immense admiration and affection for. And of course, Tripuradi, we've known each other through work. So I've been looking forward to this panel for a while, and a bit sort of, everything comes to an end. This too is now at a close. So, but yeah, in a nutshell, going back to what I said, I'm thinking a lot about the things that have come up. So thank you.
I just want to say that it's a very thought-provoking discussion, like I think whenever we talk about the creative arts and the therapies, all these questions are constantly coming up, and I don't think we found answers for many questions, but that's the beauty of it, that we're all working towards answering these questions at some point. And I just want to say that movement keeps us alive. It keeps us very human. And it's important for all of us to move. And in fact, I feel movement is our universal mother tongue. Everyone can speak it. And so I just want to leave you all, the viewers as well, with the idea that let's move, let's express, and let's transform together. Yeah. So thank you very much.
I really would like to thank Reena, Shrabosti, and everybody at KCC for this opportunity. It was inspiring to hear Tripura. I heard about Tripura in 93, 94, and she was the person who brought Gestaltism in dance therapy. Gestaltism is a psychological theory which she brought. And it's always such a joy and delight to interact with Shuktara. I'm also inspired, excited, and processing. I have got some tools from here which I'm going to apply in the work that I do, and I'm going to share it with my team. But having this done on World Mental Health Day, I would urge everyone to think about your emotion, to be authentic to your feelings. Don't be afraid of expressing what you're feeling. And we have to start somewhere. And I hope that after this, we begin to build a fabulous public and private ecosystem where we can thrive.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. And I must accept this, that especially Ratnadi to you, that when I started working, thinking that, okay, I'm going to work for inclusivity and, I'm going to make KCC a truly inclusive center. Actually, I started with the only physical limitations or challenges. And, when we first created tactile artworks of Jugen Chaudhary, we thought it's a great achievement, because some people who could not see it at least can feel it and understand it. But now that more and more I am going on this journey, I think how small that effort is, because inclusivity is not limited to so many times. Even today, so many times, Ratadi, you had been mentioning about that even movement. We take it for granted that everybody can move. But physically not everybody can move. So how much non-inclusive we are in our approach every day is an eye-opener for me, whether it is gender spectrum, whether it is physical movement, or whether it is our terminology in terms of the binary that we always have, like normal. I mean, I remember going on for on a dinner with my family, with my brother's sons, and we asked him, "What do you want to have?" He said, because we were all ordering creative dishes, he said, "I want to have a normal paneer." So that normal itself was a something that hit me even then, back then. So we are such non-inclusive people that every time I discover, every day is a revelation, and we need to do so much. And I'm really, really honored and really delighted that I keep learning and keep getting the way forward, that what more can be done. So thank you so much for being a lovely panel and being so open and generous about sharing. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for joining with us. And it's such an enriching session. I think I can end with it that it's okay not to be okay. The line, yeah, and it's always necessary to acknowledge what you were feeling. And thank you for joining with us. I'm very grateful to all the panelists for this session, and thank you all for listening. To end the session, I just want to announce our next session with Mr. Bose Krishnamachari, which is going to be on 13th, where he is going to talk about his journey and in our Artist to Entrepreneur series. Wish you a very good night and stay safe, stay well. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.